You're listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast brought to you by DraftKings. All right, fights are tonight. If you're a new customer, throw down $5 on these fights, and it doesn't even matter who wins. Sit back and get $100 in free plays. All right, with John Schuster, I'm Mike Luke. Spring football has come and gone. Taking all of your comments here. First and foremost, Shu, I want to talk a little bit about the atmosphere here. And again, I know that and trust me, I get it. It's superficial. It's all of that. But this is easy stuff for a coach, quite frankly, to be able to capitalize in a way that I don't think that obviously Kevin Sumlin really had any interest in. In that you bring in guys, you bring in your Teddy Bruschi's, your Lance Briggs, you go through it, you show off. It's a glorified scrimmage. But you know what? It's a good way to be able to get real, I guess, goodwill with the community. And listen, I don't know if Jedd Fisch can coach or not, but this is certainly something that he understands.
Well, it's another example of Fisch's ability. He's been spot on when it has come to being able to promote Arizona football as well as you can in a community that is sick and tired of not being good, but takes out that sick and tired apathy with just not being interested either. So the thing it's hard not to have been impressed with what Fisch has done in regards to try to get the community engaged and try to get some sort of familial connection to what was effective before, getting some players who are well known, using his connections to make that work. In every regard, that has been excellent. He's done a remarkable job doing that. The thing that I hope for is that he doesn't get frustrated with it, because this is going to be a long haul thing. More than Arizona football, by no stretch of any imagination, is Alabama on spring day or Ohio State on spring day or Georgia or Clemson. No, it just is not. And that's frustrating, because from the outside, I think to a large degree what happens is when you take a job like this, you know, you have a lot of people kind of around you on the inside who say, Arizona football, Tomey, Desert Swarm. They got all the Bruschi played there. Gronkowski played there. You know, you had that you got a chance to be good. And you talk to kind of this insular circle that tries to convince you about how Arizona's a football town and they're ready and you're the guy who can turn the corner. And then you do all the things right, marketing, and nobody responds. So he has to, and I get that this is difficult. He has to stick to it. He's doing the right stuff outside the lines to try to get Arizona engaged. And now he's got to be able to recruit better talent and win more games, and then Arizona will be engaged, and all of the groundwork that he's putting in now that doesn't appear as successful as he would like will hopefully pay off, and Arizona fans will jump on board. I'm just hopeful that he sticks with it and doesn't get, frustrated. Because he's doing it right. He's given it from a PR standpoint. He's given it all a go, and he's just got to stick with it. And if he can get a product that works on the field, all of this foundation is going to work out for him.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now sitting up in the press box, I was, watching it. This team, I'm going to go on record right now. And again, this isn't saying much. I get that. But this team is definitely going to be better than last year's team. I feel very comfortable in saying that. We're going to get to some of the positions. Early on, Jayden DeLaura is a guy who you would imagine will be the starter. He starts the game off with a pick, but then he comes back the very next possession. He throws a 40-yard out. He runs around. He makes a couple nice throws, gets the team into the end zone, avoids injury. The quarterback, though, that I wanted to talk a little bit about with you was Noah Fifita. Now, Fifita played in the second half, and he was probably the best quarterback out there on the roster. He's about 5'9", whatever. But some quarterbacks just kind of get it. Some the offense just seems to go. And I thought Jedd Fisch made an interesting point when he was talking about Fafita after the game. And he said, there's three different aspects that we talk about, and I'm going to mangle all three. I'll probably mangle a couple of these aspects. But he said decision-making, timeliness, accuracy. And he says that Noah does very, very well at all three of those. That's a kid to really, I think, keep an eye on because he moved the ball very well in the second half, granted, in a scrimmage-type environment.
And in a scrimmage-type environment, I think the thing that I was a little bit more concerned about, and again, this is a day of optimism. This is a day where every football program starts the same, and you can come up with reasons as to why and how Arizona can win 6 games and be bowl eligible next year. Okay, that's what this type of day is. But Arizona's better at the quarterback position, and whatever that means. I was a little bit frustrated that receivers weren't on the same page. It felt like on a relatively consistent basis. I thought the quarterbacks made what looked like good passes to receivers who were potentially open, who weren't consistently holding up their end of the bargain. So, I thought in that regard, the two guys that you mentioned, I thought did pretty well today and came closer to looking the part, which is obviously the direction that Arizona wants to go. And they're hopeful that McLeod, who I think can compete favorably in this mix as well, is a guy who can maybe push some other guys. And if McLeod is healthy, he's a guy who has a slight advantage because he's been in the system a year longer. And that may be something that helps once they get into real practice situations. But it's pretty obvious that Arizona at the quarterback position is better off now than it was a year ago. And that's Fisch recruiting correctly and moving the program hopefully in a positive direction.
Yeah, and one thing that he does get to, and some people might chalk it up as gimmicks, don't really care. Sam Thomas from the Arizona women's basketball team coming in and catching a touchdown there. Crowd went wild, obviously. PJ Brown, good friend of the show from the Stars, she said two things. Sam was able to catch that touchdown because of her long arms, which helps her on her blocks, and her genes. Her grandfather is NFL great Hall of Famer Emmett Thomas from Kansas City. PJ wrote an article about that. PJ is fantastic, so I wanted to throw that little tidbit out there. But again, when you haven't won a lot of games, this kind of engagement, it just matters. I mean, listen, Nick Saban doesn't have to engage with the fan base. Because you know what? At the end of the day, that fan base is going to be out there either way. Arizona fans have won one of their last 20 games. You've got to find something. So at least bringing back these alumni, people that haven't felt like they've really been, invested in by the program, I thought was something interesting. Now, let's get to the little bit of the point on the wide receiver quarterback connection here in a second. But I got a deal that is too good to be true. And if it's too good to be true, it's probably from the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. Okay. Fights tonight. I'm not a UFC fan, so don't take my advice for it. I don't know what I'm talking about. But you don't need to be a UFC fan to take advantage of this. $5 down on any of these fights tonight, and it doesn't matter who wins, you get $100 in free plays. New customers only, Arizona only, 21 and up. Eligibility restrictions do apply. Gambling problem, 1-800-NEXT-STEP. They'll get you taken care of. Okay. Now, let's talk about a little bit at the wide receiver quarterback position right there. What I thought was interesting, and again, it's not all the way across the board, but Arizona certainly at the wide receiver position is bigger. And they're notably bigger, I think, at certain positions than they had been in previous years, especially when you're rolling out a bunch of 5'8" wide receivers. There to me is, even though I don't know the quarterbacks were always on the same page, there to me is a lot more potential watching this team this year than I came away from the spring game last year, which I was at. You didn't watch. I don't blame you for not watching.
I think that's going to be a big topic of conversation throughout the course of the offseason, is that Arizona is in what amounts to being year one of building depth in the program and getting some players in there who have a little bit more potential at various positions. And one of the upgrades that a lot of folks have rightfully spent time with is at that wide receiver position. And yes, Arizona has some guys who look like they can obviously do a much better job in that regard and give Arizona more skill position weaponry. But catching the ball would be nice. And, I think it's going to be interesting to see how well they function against in actual defensive situations. And that's one of the things that obviously in in-game circumstances, that's what we're looking for. Arizona is better. They're moving. It's impossible for Arizona to move in a negative direction at this point. So saying that Arizona's moving in a positive direction could be a backhanded compliment. It's not intended to be that way. But it looks as though they're laying the groundwork with players who can and have the potential to be able to play in this conference and be favorably competitive. This is year one of those recruiting efforts. You need year 2, year 3, year 4, and then continue to build before you want to get to a point where Arizona hopes it's a little bit more consistent. But based on what you saw last year and what a lot of the fans saw this year, clearly there's a visual upgrade in what Arizona can do offensively, and we'll find out as the season progresses how much more improved they are once we get into actual play.
I've always felt that there's kind of a 3 or 4 year template when you're a coach taking over for a terrible program. And let's be honest, Jedd Fisch was taking over for a terrible program. Year one, and again, these are somewhat cliche, but I think that these are actually accurate. Year one to me is really just kind of about establishing a different culture. You're not going to be able to bring in a bunch of guys. You're going to have a lot of the holdovers. It's about being able to establish that culture right there. I think year 2, that's when you want to start bringing in a little bit more talent, where it's a little bit more notable what you're seeing out there, and it's easy to see that this team could be competitive. Year 3, I think that's when you really start looking at, okay, it's time to start winning a few more games. Year 4 is kind of when it's all systems go for me at that point. What do you think about that, Shu?
I think that's, I think that's a pretty solid template. And unfortunately, this gets into odd territory. You also have to have an administration that is willing to, if it appears that things are moving in the right direction, patience helps as well. A lot of times now, athletic departments say it's 3 years instead of 5. By 3 years, maybe I'm not sure how much time you really have to establish whatever it is. And then if you keep spinning your wheels after year 3, as opposed to sometimes even giving these coaches 7, then, what are you doing? I think you're hurting the overall prospect of your program. There are obviously exceptions to that and observational perspectives that come into play here. Stoops had 7 years. Rodriguez had 7 years. I think Arizona made changes at the right time. Sumlin had, a year and a half, and I think Arizona made a change at the right time there too. So in those regards, it's helped. What Fisch has done so far has been visible kind of off the field at this stage. Certainly what Arizona had on the field was atrocious last year. They played hard with what they had. They were competitive usually for about 40 minutes and then wore down in the last 20. So the verdict is, the jury is still very much out in regards to whether Fisch and the coaching staff can ultimately be effective in what matters ultimately as far as games are concerned. But in terms of marketing and in terms of improving from a recruiting standpoint, he's certainly succeeded there. And that makes you feel good as Arizona progresses.
It's difficult for me too, like people are saying, like break down the defense. It's difficult for me in a situation like this to be able to break down the defense. I thought the secondary made some nice plays there, but as in any kind of spring game,
by the same token, Mike, there were also plays where they were so lost on the back end,
right?
Of deception things. There's no way. Is that really going to happen in a game situation against any defense you see this year? The play wasn't that good, or plays that you saw really weren't that good, and right. The defense looked completely lost. So how much of that was for show, and how much of that was, how much better do you have to be when you're playing against actual competition to be well enough to make that kind of play work effectively for Arizona's offense? A lot of that remains to be seen. I have no idea coming into this game how Arizona's defense looked. I can't tell if they blew assignments half the time, or I can't tell if, they looked reasonably solid. The final score at the end, most of the game was fairly low scoring. So what does that mean? I mean, both teams scored some touchdowns to push it to 24-21 at the end. But most of the game was in the teens or even lower than that. So you'd suggest maybe the defense did a reasonably good job, but some of the stuff that I saw made the defense look bad at times. So I'm not sure really what you can take out of this. In situations like this, you're almost looking at individual players.
Exactly. That's saying, exactly what it is. Yes.
Yeah. how does that guy fall in? Does that guy look like he can legitimately perform in this conference? And then you take it from there.
Right. And and there was a lot of injuries across the way because, believe it or not, you're not going to just throw a bunch of guys out there that are injured just for the spring game. A guy that had a sack who has been notable all throughout camp is a guy named Hunter Eccles, USC transfer. He's been the best pass rusher in camp. But that also kind of goes to me that the players I don't know how much of this team, if they're going to be better next year, is going to be from just upward progression from roster holdovers as opposed to a new infusion of talent. I mean, I think last year you just, quite frankly, and I hate to say this, you just didn't see a lot of talent out there. I didn't see a lot. And there were some guys for sure, like the Harris boys can certainly play. There was some talent out there for sure. But you didn't really look at a guy and say, you know what, they just need another year of coaching and they're going to be an all-conference type guy. There wasn't a lot of that there. So in a game like this, I'm looking at the newcomers and Matthew Bothwell put right here, he said, do you think Jayden DeLauro will end up being the starter? Yes, I do because, again, he was the Pac-12 freshman quarterback or Pac-12 freshman offensive player of the year a couple years ago. Guys like that generally aren't brought in to, not start. But again, the Noah Fafita kid I thought was somebody that has really staked a claim there. And I thought Schuster made a good point too, that you can't totally forget about Jordan McLeod. It's not that Jordan McLeod was Russell Wilson last year, but out of all three of the quarterbacks, he was the only one out there that looked like he could consistently move the ball, even though he would turn the ball over a ton.
And he understands the system. And I think that's the most important thing that falls in. He'll have a little bit of a head start because he knows what the coaching staff expects. The other two may ultimately be better. And, I think your order of likelihood will probably play out at least early in the season. We'll see how things go. But you feel better about Arizona at position 1, position 2, position 3 at the quarterback than clearly you did last year where the U of A was trying to figure it out. What I'm hoping for, because what's the number, Mike? Isn't it 41 players on this roster weren't on the roster last year?
Correct.
That's clearly a pretty significant
That's a lucky
number.
Guess by John Schuster right there.
Totally out of the blue. It's one of those prime numbers. I only guess prime numbers because, hey, we're in the Eastern time zone. We're almost prime time. As far as any of that ultimately concerns, I think what you're looking at from players who were here is maybe a depth-related contribution. And that was one of the things that hurt Arizona last year. One of many things is that Arizona wore down in games. Again, they were competitive for about 2/3, and then in the last 20 minutes, they just didn't have the talent to be able to deal with what was across from them in this conference. So, but what you hope is that players who remained on this roster provide either fringe starters or guys who can contribute, who understand and grew and matured a little bit. One, they understand the system. Two, they're just a little bit physically stronger along the way. And then that helps your depth a little bit as Arizona wants to maybe pluck a few more W's than a lot of folks anticipate they might.
All right. If you want to find out where you could pluck those W's, and if you think that Vegas is backing the A too hard or not backing the A enough, you need to go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, code word PHNX. That's where you would find all of that. Again, great deal going on tonight. UFC fights. You put in $5. Doesn't matter who wins. You get $100 in free plays. If that team, it doesn't even matter. As long as that fight occurs, you get $100 in free plays. There's nothing more to it. That simple, that easy. Again, make sure to hit the subscribe on the AZ Wildcats podcast. Check out Go PHNX. They got all the best stuff from all around the state. Great time to be hopping in there with baseball starting. But before we sign off here, Shu, I put my number for Arizona football next year at, I'd like to see him win 4 games. 4 games to me, I think is doable, and I also think that shows progress in the right direction, considering that you've won 1 out of your last 20 games.
As the summer moves along, there's going to be plenty of time to break down the schedule a little bit more, and I think just looking at it from a cursory standpoint, you can make the argument that Arizona can win 4 and maybe even be fortunate enough, depending on how things go, to perhaps even be in a position where around mid-November we're talking about the possibility of bowl eligibility. It's also a possibility that Arizona gets gets off to a bad start from a non-conference standpoint and digs itself a hole and loses some confidence and struggles. To some degree, and a lot of this is dependent on schedule and quality of teams across from them as well. I'm hopeful that at some point there's a big leap around the middle of the season where it looks like Arizona has gone from the rebuilding portion to the team that has now figured it out. And very often we look at these things understandably kind of like, okay, year one, you're just trying to establish what you want to be and change the culture. God, I hate that phrase. But nevertheless, it's there. And that's year one. You get it out of your system. You try to convince players that they're going to get playing time and they're going to be on the foundation of something special. That's year two. And then year three, you've got more of you guys in here and you start to make the leap. I'm hopeful. I don't think it's always that clean. So I'm hopeful that somewhere about mid-season, and it's not necessarily easy to pick, but there's one game where they look a little iffy, and then the next game it feels like they make remarkable improvement and start to build upon that improvement throughout the course of the year. Whether you see L's or W's ultimately in the scoring column, they just look better doing it. And then maybe from there they can springboard a little bit. I don't think 4 is a bad call at all. I suspect that's a high number as far as Vegas and places like DraftKings may see it. But I think you can certainly make an argument for that as a possibility based on some of the turmoil that's taking place elsewhere in this conference and what Arizona has ahead of it as far as the schedule is concerned.
All right, everybody, really appreciate you hopping on here for a special postgame. Ricky, Duke, Matt, Scott. Let's see here. I don't want to move. Obviously, Matthew, Noah. All right, I know I'm missing a person or two, but I do thank all of you.
Yeah. Mike,
go ahead,
I'm sorry for interrupting again. These are very optimistic days, and I don't want to be, I don't want to come across like it's, Arizona football is this downer that's never going to dig itself out of the hole, and how good is the talent and all that. There's a little bit of reality that just happens to be there, but I'm glad for the folks who went out and watched. I hope they enjoyed themselves when they were there. I think Arizona put on a good product. I think Fisch is doing everything he can to be effective and try to engage the community and football fans in that regard. And for folks who were watching on some of the venues available out there, I'm glad you spent some time and committed to that as well. Let's hope that this is the springboard, the spring game springboard to a good offseason, and that Arizona favorably surprises us as this program moves in the right direction.
He's John Schuster. I'm Mike Luke. Thanks so much. You've been listening to the AZ Wildcats podcast. Oh, hold on just a second here.